Hey, what's up everybody? I'm Mike Riley, and in today's video, I'm going to talk about self-defense. I recently finished a murder trial that involved a claim of self-defense. These issues can be very complicated, and I thought today would be a good time to share these concepts with you. In today's video, you can expect to learn how the law defines self-defense, how courts interpret self-defense claims, the difference between deadly physical force, and some of the exceptions to the self-defense laws found throughout the country. Now, before I start, it's worth noting that self-defense laws vary greatly depending on what state you're in. So in today's video, I intend to give a general overview of some of the concepts that come up with self-defense law. I would encourage you to do some independent research, dig deeper on the self-defense laws in your particular state. So let me start by giving you an example of how self-defense can be defined by statute. A person is justified in using reasonable physical force upon another person to defend himself, herself, another person from what he or she reasonably believes to be the use or imminent use of physical force. And he or she may use such degree of force which he or she reasonably believes to be necessary for such purpose, except that deadly physical force may not be used unless the actor reasonably believes that such other person is using or about to use deadly physical force or inflicting or about to inflict great bodily harm. So I want to break down some of these concepts that we see in this self-defense statute. The first one I want to talk about is this idea of a reasonable belief. A person is justified in using self-defense when they have a reasonable belief that the other person is using or is about to use physical force against them. So what does this concept of reasonable belief mean? Well, it's what we call in the law an objective subjective standard. So the person has to have an actual belief that they need to use physical force, that the other person is about to use physical force or is using physical force. But that's not enough. Even if someone actually believes that they need to use physical force to deflect an attack, if that belief is not reasonable, self-defense would not be justified. So let me give you an example of that. Let's say someone is on a bunch of drugs and they're hallucinating and they encounter someone on the street and they perceive that that person is about to attack them or that that person is about to kill them. They might have an actual belief that that is what's going on. However, that belief might not be reasonable. The only reason they have that belief is because their perception is dramatically altered by some substance, and although the actual belief is there, it would not be a reasonable belief, and self-defense would not be justified. Another thing we see in these self-defense laws is this concept of imminence. Someone is justified in defending themselves from the use or imminent use of physical force. Imminence means it's immediate, it's about to happen now. There are no preemptive strikes justified by self-defense law. So if someone says to you, I'm gonna get you one of these days, you're not justified in punching them in the mouth because there is no imminent threat. They are not using physical force against you, and even though they indicated a willingness to use physical force against you in the future, there is no imminent threat. Self-defense likely would not be justified in court. We also see that the law distinguishes between the use of deadly physical force to defend oneself and physical force. Deadly physical force can be defined as force that is reasonably believed to bring about a serious physical injury or death. Usually the degree of force is pretty easy to determine. If someone is using a gun, I think all courts would agree that that is deadly physical force. Even if you don't intend to kill the person, if you shoot them in the leg, I think a court would find that that is deadly physical force. The law does not allow someone to use deadly physical force unless they are combating or repelling the use or threatened use of deadly physical force or force that is likely to cause great bodily harm. So if someone squares up against me and says they want to have a fist fight, even if I believe that they are about to punch me in the face, that it is imminent, I would not be justified in pulling a gun out of my pocket and shooting that person. In this situation, I don't have a reasonable belief that this person person is about to use deadly physical force, you cannot bring a gun to a fist fight. You also can't use deadly physical force to protect property. I once represented a guy who had his work van in front of his house. During the middle of the night, he woke up to some noises outside. He looked outside and saw somebody going through his work van, basically stealing his livelihood. This client of mine grabbed a firearm that he was licensed to have, went out on his front porch, and started shooting at the guy who was breaking into his van. And in fact, he hit him several times. Fortunately, the guy did not die. That was not a justified use of physical force because, again, my client was alleged to have been using deadly physical force to defend his property. There was no threat of deadly physical force that he was facing, that his family was facing. So in the eyes of the law, that was not a justified use of physical force. Some states have what's called a duty to retreat law, meaning that someone is not justified in using deadly physical force if they can safely retreat. The opposite of this would be a stand your ground law, where there is no duty to retreat. In states that do require a duty to retreat, if someone has a completely safe way of exiting the situation without using deadly force, they would not be justified if they opted to use deadly force instead of taking the retreat. And again, we have other states, the majority of states are stand your ground states, which do not require someone to retreat in that situation. So again, it's really important that you know the particular laws of the state you're in. And obviously, self-defense laws apply to situations where there is non-deadly force used by someone to defend themselves. So we're just talking about regular physical force. So someone comes up with their fist cocked, they want to punch me in the face. I think that they're about to swing. It's a reasonable belief. In that situation, I would be justified in punching that person in the face to prevent them from what I reasonably believe to be the imminent use of physical force against me. There are a few other exceptions to self-defense laws that I want to touch upon briefly. The first is provocation. Provocation is an exception to self-defense laws in many states. I can't go and try and fire somebody up and get them to try and hit me so I can then defend myself. So if I go up to someone on the street, start talking about their mom, start saying all sorts of nasty things, and the second I push them over their limit and they turn to hit me, I would not be justified in taking that person out because I provoked them. They weren't bothering me. I provoked them to use physical force against me, and I can't then claim self-defense. Similarly, there's this concept of initial aggressor. An initial aggressor cannot claim self-defense. So again, if I go up to somebody on the street and start punching them, and then when they go to punch me back, I, take further action, use physical force against them, I can't then claim self-defense because in that situation, I'm the initial aggressor. Basically, I started it. I can't then claim self-defense. Self-defense cases are not easy. Most of the time, this is not a good guy versus bad guy situation. These cases involve complicated factual analyses. These are difficult cases, especially self-defense cases that involve deadly physical force. And oftentimes the police aren't going to show up on the scene and say, yep, this was self-defense, you were justified, go on with your life, have a nice day. Oftentimes what the police are going to do is they're going to arrest somebody. And even though somebody might ultimately be acquitted, found not guilty, found that they acted in self-defense, they're going to have to go through the whole court process, maybe go all the way through a jury trial, and that is a harrowing task. In order to do that, you really need to risk everything. You need to risk your whole life in jail in order to exercise this right, and it's not easy. These cases are not easy. They're not clean cut. They can be some of the most complicated cases that we see in court. So what do you think about self-defense laws? Do you lean more towards the duty to retreat, or do you think stand your ground laws are more appropriate? Do you think that the law should distinguish between physical force and deadly physical force? I would love to hear your thoughts and comments below. Please like and subscribe. I appreciate all of your support. Thank you so much for watching.